Hey, Imania, can you try unmuting and see if I can hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yay! Okay,
Good deal.
you're good. So you're unmuted. Perfect. You can control yourself.
Anne, you there? Good morning.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was going to see if you could unmute yourself.
I can, yes.
Hi, good morning. This is the court reporter. Before the meeting starts, can I please get everyone's first and last names, please?
Hey, Will, good morning. This is Steve. I just wanted to let you know that for your slides, Brendan asked me to reproduce a few of them to show when he's reading his staff report, but we didn't move them from your presentation. So your presentation is fully intact, but a couple of your slides have been copied over, and I just put it at the very beginning. So after we go through those four, it'll just start with your first slide.
Not a problem. Thanks for letting me
So
know.
it's not confusing. And just to confirm, you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, we should be starting up in a few minutes then.
Steve, you're still in you're not
I
in
know.
conversation
Yeah,
mode.
I need to work on that.
Okay.
There we go.
Good morning, Amadia. Can I get your last name for the record, please?
Price, Price.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the November 30th, 2023 meeting of the DC Historic Preservation Review Board. My name is Marnique Heath, Chair of the Board. Public notice of this WebEx meeting and participation instructions have been emailed to the project applicants and the HPO mailing list and posted on the Office of Planning website. The meeting is live streamed and archived on the Office of Planning's YouTube channel. Please be aware that if you're watching on YouTube, you will not be able to provide testimony. Those wishing to provide testimony must register in advance and join via WebEx. I'm going to now ask that each board member participating in today's meeting, please turn on your cameras and I'll do a roll call to identify who's present. Good morning, Board Member Arbach.
Good morning, Board Member Arbach present.
Great. Board Member Bell.
Good morning, Matt Bell, present.
Good morning. And Board Member Thaler. thought I saw her. I do. She's muted.
Sorry, I'm just having technical difficulties. I'm here. I'll turn on my camera too in a bit. Sorry about this.
No worries. No worries. Thanks for being on. Board Member Beatty is not able to join us today, but we do have a quorum. Since we're only missing one board member. Before we begin the meeting, I'll go over a few procedural points. The camera function has been enabled for presenters and board members. So at the beginning of each case, cameras can be turned off so that the focus is on the presentation slides. When cameras are on, each person speaking should identify themselves. I'll first ask HPO staff to present their report and evaluation of the case, and then I'll ask the applicant to present their project plans. HPO has preloaded the plans provided by the applicant and will advance the slides upon request. Following the applicant's presentation, we'll hear testimony from ANCs, community groups, and individuals who have registered in advance to speak. The camera function is not available for those providing testimony. After all testimony has been presented and the board's ready to ask questions and deliberate, I'll ask board members, staff, and presenters to turn on their cameras. After the board is finished deliberating and taken a vote on the project, cameras can then be turned off again for the next presentation. In accordance with the ANC Act, the Historic Preservation Review Board is committed to giving careful consideration to the community and ANC comments that we receive. Our regulations require us to give great weight to properly adopted written recommendations of ANCs in the matters that come before us. To ensure that great weight is given, the board discusses and addresses each issue or concern raised in ANC resolutions as a part of our deliberation and includes that discussion in the public record of the case as recorded in the live videos of our meetings. Following the meeting on the board's behalf, HPO archives the video recordings on the HPO website, keeping them accessible to the public. They prepare a written summary of the board's actions, which includes a report of our findings and conclusions on any issues and concerns raised in ANC resolutions, articulating with particularity and precision our reasons why, or the ANC did or did not offer persuasive advice. And then they post a written record on the HPO website 1 week following the meeting, keeping it permanently accessible to the public. Before we get to our agenda for the day, we do have a few consent calendar items. Gretchen, you have a comment about the first, is that right?
Yeah, the very first one I do.
Okay.
I think that I think I have my camera working here. I think that the main comment that I have is that I don't have any objection to the subdivision, and I think the revisions that were stated in the staff report are good. There's not a lot of information about the materials that are proposed to be used for the project, and so I would ask for the applicants to provide staff clarity on what the siding is made of, what the windows are made of, so that we don't end up with, vinyl siding, vinyl windows, those kind of things, which are not typically allowed within the historic district. I'm sure, and perhaps that's already part of the dialogue between the applicant and the staff, but we don't have a paper trail and it doesn't show up on the document. So I would just ask for that to happen as a matter of record.
Okay, thank you. I think that's certainly a baseline of what we should expect. So thanks for bringing that up. Any other comments? Any comments from anyone else? All right, then I will make a motion that we approve all consent calendar cases A through E with the notation on A as noted by board member Failer, and ask for a second.
A second.
Great, thanks. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone oppose? All right. The motion carries. So we're ready for our first case. It's 77 to 79 Bryant Street Northwest. Would staff like to make your presentation? Then we'll hear from the applicant.
Of course. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
Just trying to shuffle around my screens so I could see everything on my laptop.
Okay.
Give me 1 second, please.
Sure, take your time.
Okay, I should be all set. Again, good morning, Madam Chair, other board members. My name is Brendan Meyer with the Historic Preservation Office. I am the lead design reviewer for the Bloomingdale Historic District. This case is case number 24-049 at the property address of 77 to 79 Bryan Street Northwest in the Bloomingdale Historic District. The plans were prepared by Tays Warren Architects for the owners of the property, the Mu Lambda Foundation, a nonprofit social service and educational organization. The board should recognize this site as a familiar site. The board last reviewed this site in 2021. And at that time, the board approved alterations to the house at 2405 First Street Northwest and to the subdivision of the corner lot into two new lots, to create two new lots, which front on Bryan Street and are the site of the concept design that the board is reviewing today. You'll see in the image on your screen that the house with the three dormers and the front porch is very unique to the historic district. It was built in 1904 for one of the most prominent and prolific developers of Bloomingdale, Raymond Middaugh. He built it as his home and residence within the neighborhood he was developing as a row house neighborhood. So this Georgian Revival single freestanding house is very distinctive in the historic district. And when the board created the two new lots in 2021, approved that subdivision, part of the board's concern and purpose in their approval was to preserve the side yard of the Middaugh house. That side yard is now still part of the lot where the house sits, and it goes all the way to the corner of Bryant and First. And you could see that configuration in the image on your screen. The two new lots that were created are both approximately 35 feet wide. They front on Bryan Street. And the intent of the proposal is to front on Bryan Street and pick up the rhythm and proportions of the row of row houses that occupy the entire block of Bryan Street from North Capitol Street to First Street. I will skip over the detailed description of the applicant's proposal. I will defer to their presentation so they could walk you through their design, and I will move on to the staff evaluation of their concept design. The concept design is for two row houses. Each row house will have 2 units in it, so it's a total of 4 units. The concept presented today deviates slightly from what the board anticipated when the board approved the subdivision back in 2021. But this deviation to 2 row houses is not incompatible with the historic district. The proposal is substantially compatible with the forms, heights, and rhythms of the historic row houses, which set the scale of Bryan Street. The board should consider some design revisions to assure sufficient compatibility with the historic district. So just going further into detail in terms of 2 houses as the number of houses. During the subdivision planning process, the applicant presented to the board several options on how to build out the proposed subdivision. Because when an applicant makes a proposal for a subdivision, the board's primary concern is that it's going to create building lots that are sized and oriented to enable compatible construction. So as part of that exercise, the applicant, during their application for the subdivision, developed up to 4 options of how they would build out the site. And when the board reviewed those options, it advised the applicant that their option for 4 row houses with 4 projecting bays was the best one that they proposed. Today, what the board is looking at is a proposal for 2 row houses with 2 bays that has the advantage that it's been further developed by the applicant and shows more details and shows more context. And staff recommends that they presented a convincing presentation to show that this too is compatible with the historic district, this arrangement of 2 row houses and 2 projecting bays. Staff comes to that conclusion primarily because although the dimensions of the houses, their widths, and the dimensions of the bays aren't a precise duplicate of the nearby row houses, they are in accord with the rhythm established by the street. They're in proportion to those rhythms. Staff also recommends that by having its own width, these new houses will signify themselves as not historic houses, but modern houses. And to have that distinction between historic row houses and modern row houses is an advantage, because in that way we respect the historic houses. We don't expect the modern houses to be exactly like historic houses, and the public can see the distinction and understand the history of the neighborhood and see how it developed. As successful as the front facades are, there are a couple design issues that the board should consider and advise the applicant on. In particular, the front facades, which are successful, the way their bays are arranged, the horizontal string courses that delineate the floor levels, the wide front porches, which are the unique characteristics to Bloomingdale. Several Bloomingdale houses have front porches that span the full width of the bay and connect them to the projecting bay. So these front porches achieve the same configuration. For as successful as that is, what the applicant does is they extend this very formal front composition around to the side elevations that are unattached on the project. So to the east, or which is on the right in this view, there's an alley which exposes that side wall. And on the west, which is on the left of this view, that overlooks the side yard of the Middaugh house. Typically, or historically, I should say, when row house developers were faced with an unusual exposure to the side of the row houses, like for instance, when there's an alley, developers would do a formal front elevation as expected, and then their side elevations would transition to a more informal composition. It would lose its ornament. The window pattern would become more informal and more randomly arranged. So there is a hierarchy achieved in row house compositions. The front elevations would be formal. The side elevations would be less formal. We recommend that the applicant should take advantage of that design approach and reduce some of the formality that they've extended to the side elevations. They have an opportunity to simplify their side elevations, and that presents a couple advantages for how the house will play its role in the streetscape. It reinforces the hierarchy of the houses and reinforces the fact that they face Bryant Street. And it also helps to disengage the houses from the corner at First and Bryant. And that's an important consideration, we feel, because corner row houses in Bloomingdale, and especially on First Street, when the houses sit directly on the corner, they are augmented with distinct corner bays. And so you get this very prominent massing and architectural organization of the neighborhood through these corner bays. And that's great for corner row houses, but we would keep in mind that the houses that are being designed and proposed today technically aren't corner houses. What's important about this corner is that the corner remain open as a side yard for the mid-aisle house. That space, we believe, should be reserved for the house. So to help complement that arrangement, the row houses designed and proposed today really should try to disengage as much as possible from the corner. And so by treating the side elevation, the west elevation, as an informal facade, they could achieve that. They will distinctly mark the facade facing Bryant as the front facade, and the facade facing the side yard as the side facade. And that can very simply be done by perhaps reducing the amount of windows on the west elevation. Go from a pair of windows to a single window. Terminate the string courses at the front elevation with maybe a slight turn, but the string courses do not have to run the entire length of the side elevations. The elevation facing the alley on the east is already close to that configuration. It has one window. The elevation on the west should try to be more like the east elevation and achieve that simpler informal form. So overall, we believe the concept is well done and compatible with the overall context of Bryant Street and the historic district. But it would benefit from refinement of those side elevations to simplify them. HBO recommends that the review board find the concept of 2 3-story row houses with projecting bays at 77 to 79 Bryant Street Northwest to be compatible with the character of the historic district and consistent with the purpose of the Preservation Act. And we advise and we ask that the board advise the applicant on the revisions that I just outlined, and that the board delegate final approval to staff. Thank you. I will remain on the line and available for questions that the board might have.
Great, thanks, Brendan. And now the applicant.
Good morning. My name is Will Tays. I'm a principal with Tays Warren Architects. And yeah, if we could start with slide 2, that would be great. I appreciate Brendan's overview of the project. I think he covered many of the introductory points that we wanted to make, but just to quickly recap, we are proposing to construct 2 new flats, which would be a total of 4 units on a previously subdivided lot. We were somewhat involved with some of the design iterations during the subdivision process, and we haven't really been as involved with the alterations to the mid-aisle house. So I just wanted to illustrate or raise that point. We are proposing 3-story structures that have a cellar with a configuration where the upper level is 3 levels with a basement apartment. We do have some site gymnastics to contend with regard to access to parking and whatnot, but I think the principal issue that we're talking about today is the composition of the facades, in particular the west facade, which you can see in this image quite clearly here. And I think it raises a really interesting question about what should the side elevation be. I think that there is in our mind, a distinction between an alleyway and the very unique condition of this side yard / corner lot that is to the south of the middle house. And so our inclination was to treat that facade a little bit more ornamented or a little bit more special than we might treat an alley blind facade or even a rear facade. And so the thinking there was to continue some of that detail work around the corner. Next slide, please.
Oh, shit, I missed it.
Just to provide a little bit of context with regard to the site, here's an aerial photo of the overall, both sites combined here highlighted. We are at the corner, as was pointed out, with First and Bryant. Next slide. And to give you some context of the surrounding buildings, starting from the upper left, this is looking to the southeast. Directly across the street is a kind of a classic row house with a turret on the corner. The upper right image is the properties immediately to the east that demonstrate both the hexagonal bay configuration as well as the pitched roof. The lower left-hand corner is a broader view of the site, and we've outlined in rough terms our proposed project. And then the lower right is if you're looking, standing on Bryant Street, looking west, again, highlighting our site. Next slide, please. The site plan, I think, illustrates one of the challenges we have with this project. And you can see here on the right side of the slide, or the east side, the typical row house that's 16, 17 feet wide, somewhere between 35 and 50 feet deep. And our lots are considerably shallower, and so we went with an approach that developed a row house that was a bit wider. So not as common, but certainly not atypical. And looked at bringing in the hexagonal bay configuration as a way to pick up that rhythm from the street. Next slide, please. Actually, if we can go back one, I'm sorry. I think the property line actually extends technically into the mid-off side yard a bit. I think one of the design considerations that was communicated to us relatively early on was really holding back the west side of the building, that west facade that's in question, to make sure that ample open space was still provided at the corner. And then from there, it steps back as the state property lines step back as well. Next slide, please. I think we talked a little bit about the elevation, or Brendan did in his presentation, but we're trying to pick up on some of the detail, some of the rhythm that is established on the street. We obviously have a wider lot, between 32 and 36 feet. Both of these properties are about 32, 31 feet. And so we end up having the typical row house being sort of an A-B rhythm. We have an A, B prime, and then C, and the slight deviation between the C's in both 77 and 79 Bryant, but it's almost imperceptible. Next slide, please. I think the front overhead view gives you a sense a little bit of how we had proposed to treat the west facade, which is, I think, really the primary concern that staff has raised. And what you're seeing here, as Brendan described, is some of the trim and detail work extending around the corner on the west facade, creating a double pair of windows. I think we're certainly open if the board feels that a more restrained approach is appropriate here to redesign it and work with staff on that. But I did want to just articulate our thoughts in terms of the design of that west facade. Next slide. And then I guess just wanted to leave us on this image, which shows the overall our building in the center, rendered in white here, just to differentiate between the existing gray of the context around us. And I think really calls into question the primary issue, which is what the western facade, how it should be composed, and the level of detail. I think the intent here is that we would, the street facade and the west facade would be brick, and a portion of the east facade would also be brick, and then we would transition to a cementitious panel. We would be using aluminum clad windows. We talked about some of the detail work that we're picking up from the adjacent properties and carrying that across, but simplifying the tops of the rectilinear bays, or the hexagonal bays, I'm sorry. And then we're also looking at a small roof deck at the top of each. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the board for any questions.
Great. Thank you. Well, are there any questions from the board at this time?
Yeah, well, mine's more for Brendan, I think. Is that okay if we ask him a question here?
I'm okay with that.
That yard that faces the west there, on the west side of the townhouse, that's going to be open space in perpetuity, is it not?
Well, there's no legal covenant making that so. But the board's actions with how they subdivided the lot allow for that right now. And so that side yard is part of the lot of the Middahl house. No one can say what a board 50 years from now will do with that lot.
But the side yard is part of the single family house, right?
Yes, it is part of the Middahl house.
Okay.
And we would continue to recommend that side yard be preserved as part of the house if any future case comes up in the near future.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then this is for the architect, there are 4 units here in the row houses. Is that right?
Correct. There are 2 flats.
2 English basements and 2 above.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would you, this might be a premature question, but would you have the building, the row house building, be all one brick color, or would you have it be 2 brick color?
I think if you go back, can we go back just a couple of slides to the 1 more, 2 more, maybe 1 more? Yeah. So The pattern of development, if you look on the upper right-hand side, is sort of a varying color. So the idea would be a single brick, but I think to paint it 2 different colors to kind of pick up on the condition on the north side of the street here, and actually really both sides of the street.
And I'm aware of the Bloomingdale neighborhood pretty well through my involvement with Macmillan, but and the row houses, the widths tend to be pretty consistent. But are there any wide bodies like this in Bloomingdale that you know of that are wider
I'm
than the
aware of.
standard townhouse lot?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I've not done an exhaustive study.
And are there any apartment buildings in this area? It's mostly row houses, but are there not a couple of little apartment buildings or not? You know?
I would
Brendan,
imagine
do
so.
you
But
know? Okay, so you don't know. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Would you like me to contribute to that? This is Brendan Meyer.
Yeah, do you know if there's any apartment buildings in this area?
Apartment buildings tend to be further south in the historic district. That's where they gravitate.
Okay.
There aren't apartment buildings designed as apartment buildings in this part of the historic district, which is on the north
Okay.
half of the historic district.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Any board members? Okay. We don't have anyone registered to testify on this case this morning. So, if there are no other questions from the board,
I have one other question.
go ahead.
So, in the package we received, there were all these different facade options included. I'm not sure they're part of this presentation, but I'm looking at a package that has a number of facades. Yeah, that's them. I can understand, I guess this is for the architect. I can understand, go back to one where you just were. I can understand the bottom one, which would be difficult to subdivide it into 2 equal units if you had a bay in the middle, particularly if it was rounded. And the top one on this page may be equally challenging there. Can you go back one? What I find interesting about the one on top, or about these two, is the relative degree of verticality of the flat piece, the piece that doesn't project, I guess in both of these, which seems more vertical, and I might be splitting hairs here, but it seems somewhat more vertical than the option you're presenting. Any thoughts about that? Why these were discounted? Did you want to separate the entries? Did you feel that was a more consistent thing? Was Bloomingdale or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think we included these just to demonstrate. We spent some time studying kind of different facade and massing treatments here. And our concern is, I think for both options, really option B, the top one is just the proportions, and by projecting the C, it kind of is the inverse of the typical condition, right? Typically the A element is the bay projection, that is a much smaller dimension if you look at the homes to the right, and it didn't feel right to us. And so we sort of went to C, which is to sort of, what if you take the A dimension and I think look at that in terms of a square bay. And then I think one of the helpful staff comments that we got was, should we consider the hexagonal bay as opposed to the square bay? Which I think, again, felt a little bit better, particularly as you sort of shifted to a more three-dimensional view.
Okay, thank you.
Did you do any facade studies on the side elevations, the east and west well, to look at how it might be?
We did not. Yeah, we didn't. We have not really explored that in any extensive depth, but we certainly would be happy to work with staff on preparing a couple of different treatments.
Okay. Yeah, I assumed that you had conversations with Brendan about his concerns there. So,
yeah, I think we, originally we had adopted more of a turret approach on the corner, and a very early version of this And I think that, as Brendan and staff had indicated, that was probably not the right response. And so we scaled back from doing a kind of a corner turret. But I do think, to Matt's original point or original question, while we can't foresee what would happen on that corner is too small to be subdivided legally. You would have to maintain the side yard. So there's a significant zoning and I think historic concerns or issues that would really impact the development of that. And so, from our perspective, I think just thinking about that west facade more than just an alley facade was really the main driver there. But I think we would, again, we're it's not the hill that we're going to die on here. I think that if we can do some additional study and find something that works, that's more compatible, and I think is perhaps a less restrained, a more restrained approach rather to the detail ornamentation on the west facade.
But you make a good point. If it were to be subdivided, it couldn't be subdivided unless it went through a zoning action, right? And it came here. So that's one reason why you could argue it's different than an alley facade, right? Not to prevent the single family house from, say, tearing the porch off, although they'd have to come before HPRB to do that and make a big addition, right?
It would.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So any final questions from the board? All right.
Sorry, one last
Go ahead. Well, yeah, you have the opportunity to make.
My apologies. I just wanted to cite that we did review this with the Bloomingdale Civic Association and the ANC. And I don't know, I didn't see a letter in the file, but we received unanimous support from both groups.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, because it's not. We didn't have that in the file. Okay. All right. Okay, then is the board ready to deliberate?
Yeah.
All right. Anyone want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. It's an interesting project because it is a bit of a challenge to get a row house proportion out of 2 row houses in this site. And I can appreciate the artfulness at which the studies have been done and also the final concept has been presented. In this view here, if it wasn't for the 2 staircases, it kind of looks like an apartment building to me. Which is sort of why I asked the question about whether or not it would be painted 2 different colors or finished in 2 different colors, which would probably be consistent with Bloomingdale and probably differentiate them in an appropriate way. One does find wide bodies in odd places. I think a few of them exist like this on Capitol Hill and stuff, and they're unusual, but it doesn't mean they don't happen. And does that mean you can't do it? No, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that it is a departure from what one finds in a neighborhood that has a very, very strong typological structure to these row houses and things. So I guess I can talk myself into that. The west facade, I'm sort of disagree with the staff report. I think actually the likelihood of that corner lot being developed is very, very low. I think the issue is a setback, not the typological issue. It is a corner lot. And I think having a rather nice bay to look at there, I actually think it's a little bit under detailed, to tell you the truth. I think having a nice bay there is the appropriate gesture. I would not treat that like an alley facade. I think that that's a facade where some sort of embellishment ought to happen on that corner because it will be highly visible, unlike alley facades. So I think they're headed in the right place with this treatment. As I said, I think maybe it could be a little bit, perhaps embellished somewhat, but it seems to me instinctively to be the right approach.
When you say embellished somewhat, Matt, do you mean as it is right now with this bay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, could it I don't know if there's room for, any other projection or whether the detailing on it might be somewhat different. The building is bordering on a little bit plain. there, and maybe there's some brick detailing and other things that happen on the front and this side facade that are unique to it, and it ends where it wraps into the inboard side of that facade. It could be, small arches, or it could be vertical wood posts, and to make it look more like a consistent bay vertically. I don't know exactly, but it just seems like an opportunity there to put a little sparkle on the corner of the facade. And consequently, some of those things might ripple back into the rest of the facade. I mean, I think the basic the basic intention here is I support. I just think there's some things that could make it a bit stronger.
It almost feels like this wants to be 3 row houses and not 2. The proportions, Matt would fill up better. And then I think you could make that corner really be a turret, and that turret just happens to round the entire end of the building. And then it would be like a little moniker for the grouping of row houses. But at 2, then I think that corner probably needs to maintain the dialogue of what happens on the flat elevations of the front, and maybe just a little more simplified. But I agree with you too that it's got this unique condition, and so should be constructed as it has this unique condition. But where it steps back behind the addition to the historic home, I think that should be simplified as it's shown in the sketch that we're looking at here too. That should be, a party wall kind of side elevation that isn't a prominent clad elevation.
You're talking about the one that is on this
Behind the porch.
side. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But let me make sure I understand you, Gretchen. You think the way they've turned the corner with this bay, that's okay for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that approach. I'm not sure. I think what they've done to make this look like almost 4 row houses,
Mm-hmm.
trying to replicate the rhythm. It's a little bit more narrow than the typical rhythm of the row houses here, but I think that is nice. It would be hard to imagine them being able to, because of the shallow depth, making this into 3
Mm-hmm.
rather than 2. But I would support this.
One other thing,
Yeah,
about
go ahead,
this,
Matt.
the sort of dangling porch corner there is, I think maybe that needs a pier under it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Y-
Mhm.
Yeah, kind of
sorry.
flying off the sort of Bauhaus corner there. Seems somewhat at odds with the building. Probably needs a pier there. Or even the railing, maybe there's a pier railing thing that happens there.
Strengthen
Railings,
that.
yeah. I
Visually.
think you do see a lot of masonry sort of piers and railings and things in Bloomingdale
Mm-hmm.
there, so that might be something to consider as well.
Mhm. Okay. Ordinarily, I'd say let's let the applicant continue to work through some of the minor tweaks and have this come back possibly on consent, but the community has indicated support already through the ANC. So unless the board wants to see this come back, I feel like the comments that we've made are pretty minor. And I would be fine to let the applicant work through them with staff.
I would concur with that.
Okay. All right. Okay, then go ahead, Matt.
I would just make a motion to approve and delegate final approval to staff.
Perfect. There we go. I'll second it. So then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Then the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Thank you.
And we're ready to move to our next application, which is in the Capitol Hill Historic District at 630 G Street Southeast. We'll hear from staff and then the applicant.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm Todd Jones with HPO staff, so I'll speak first about the project, then I'll turn it over to the applicant. The property is a 3-story detached brick house built around 1841, which makes it one of the oldest residences in the Capitol Hill Historic District. F Street Terrace, a historic named alley, runs north to south along the building's west side. On the other side of the alley to the west of the house is Christ Church, which was built around 1807 and is one of the oldest standing houses of worship in the District of Columbia. So taken together, the house, the alley, and the church present a rare, largely unchanged view that dates to before the Civil War. The applicant proposes to add a 3-story brick addition to the rear of the house and a roof deck accessed by a small penthouse on top, both of which are labeled on the elevation before you. The roof deck will cover both the new rear addition as well as the historic house itself. The small penthouse will be built through the roof of the historic house and will measure about 8 feet wide, 13 feet long, and 6 feet tall, just large enough to accommodate a staircase. What complicates this project is the exceptionally large front yard of neighboring Christ Church. The historic church is set back from the G Street curb by about 90 feet. That's almost the same distance that 630 G Street's rear wall currently stands from the curb, meaning that almost the entire house could fit in the church's front yard. This means that all the work done to the rear and roof of the house will be visible from G Street and will impact that rare pre-Civil War vista. Staff, however, finds the proposed rear addition to be compatible. Historic maps and photographs show that a rear addition did exist on the house previously during parts of the 19th and 20th centuries. It was only 2 stories tall, but was well over double the length of what is currently proposed. So including a mass at the rear of this building would not be a major departure from the house's historic appearance. In addition, the applicant worked closely with staff to modify the design of the concept so that it better blends in with the surrounding neighborhood, yet still stands distinct from the original house. The more complicated part of the concept involves the proposed roof deck and specifically the small penthouse. As currently designed, no portion of the roof deck itself will be visible from the street. However, about 6 inches of the top of the penthouse structure will be visible. Staff has identified 3 options to remove that sliver of penthouse from view, and we ask that the board identify which option, if any, it prefers. You can see an image of each option on the right of the slide before you. Option 1 is to change nothing with the historic house itself, and instead to either remove the penthouse structure completely or to turn it into an access hatch. This option is not preferred by the applicants as it might require the loss of the roof deck, about which they have already graciously made many revisions and concessions through discussions with staff. Option 2 is to install an extended cornice along the west elevation. This is the applicant's preferred option. The cornice would mimic the general form of the character-defining cornice at the front of the building, but would not mimic its elaborate detailing. Though an extended cornice would keep the top of the penthouse out of view, staff believes this option would cause a much more noticeable change to the house's overall appearance. And considering that the existing front cornice is such a unique and important feature, we believe that the introduction of another longer cornice would lessen that feature's importance and uniqueness. It should be noted, though, that according to historic photographic evidence, a cornice did exist on the former rear addition that was demolished at some point in the 20th century. So the existence of a cornice on the west side of the house is not completely unprecedented. The last option, option 3, was developed by staff as a compromise and is the suggested option for the board. In this case, the existing brick parapet wall would be raised slightly, which would block the view of the penthouse and more thoroughly hide any glimpse of activity on the roof deck. At the moment, the existing parapet is stepped. On the slide before you, arrow C is marking the dotted line of the current roof line, showing its gradual steps. Under option 3, the height of the highest step would remain the same, while the 2 lower steps of the parapet would be raised up to that height. So the entire parapet of the existing historic building would thus be the same height. And arrow B on the slide marks that new uniform height. The same strategy would be done on the opposite elevation, which is not as easily viewed from the street. It is believed that the brick parapet is not as important of a feature as the front cornice, and its alteration will not overly or negatively impact the appearance of the building. In this situation, the brick wall essentially serves as a background feature of the building rather than as an active defining element such as the front cornice. But option 3 also provides additional benefits that option 1 does not. Because of the stepped appearance of the existing parapet, its lowest rear wall is actually slightly lower than the proposed parapet of the new rear addition. On the slide, notice how arrow A shows the height of the proposed addition, which is taller than arrow C, which marks the current rear roof height and what will remain the height under option 1. The cause for this is because staff has asked the applicant to raise the parapet on the rear addition to help cover up railings on the roof deck. By raising the parapet of the existing house, as option 3 recommends, the roof line of the existing house will be clearly taller than the new rear addition, which is evidenced by comparing arrows A and B. This is necessary so that the new rear addition appears fully subordinate to the historic house. In addition, if the historic existing house has one parapet of equal height, it will help make it appear as one distinct mass. This will further differentiate the new addition from the existing historic house. And then finally, one last important consideration for this property is to not only look at its architecture, but also look at its historical role in the neighborhood. For almost the first century of this building's existence, it was referred to as, quote, the Marks Mansion, after its first owner. So that's what residents of Capitol Hill called the house back then, a mansion. In the late 19th century, the next family that bought the building added the now removed rear addition. So at the time of its construction, this building was intended to be larger than its neighbors, and in subsequent decades, it continued to live up to that name. After that, though, the mansion shrunk with the loss of the rear addition. At the same time, the other houses along the block grew. There are now relatively modest row houses in the area that are the same width, height, and even depth as the Marks Mansion. The applicant's concept for you today will increase the overall massing of the house in a compatible way. Adding the 3-story rear addition and raising the height of the brick parapet wall are 2 components to increasing the sense of massing. The result will be an appropriate restoration of the Marks Mansion's historical role and prominence in the neighborhood. It should also be noted that staff considers the strategy of raising the parapet wall to be a unique solution for this house only. If the board decides to go this route, its decision will not set a precedent for other future applicants to do the same. This is a unique strategy devised in response to the unique aspects of this case, such as the large neighboring yard and the existing building's easily adaptable parapet profile. So to summarize, staff recommends that the board find the rear addition and option 3 for raising the brick parapet wall to be compatible with the Capitol Hill Historic District and delegate authority to staff. So I thank you, and I'll pass it on to the applicant.
Morning, everybody. My name is George with Anthony Wilder Design Build. We were hired by the Sings to run for the renovation and addition of 630 G Street. As you can see in the first picture here, I think some of my information was is similar to what Todd already presented, so we'll skip through a little bit of it. But this is from the front of the 630 G Street. From G Street, you see the alley there with its large, fairly plain facade. Would you go to the next slide, please? And the next slide. There's the historic photo. Like Todd was mentioning, because Christ Church is set back, we feel like we have a unique condition here, which is atypical to to other alley properties, other corner alley properties in Capitol Hill. Next slide, please. Which also allows us the option, or allows us, next slide, please. This is showing the previous additions in the rear. So this is the picture to the right here is what really captured our interest at first. It's a very plain, for having such a large exposure, it's such a plain facade on the side. And although it was referred to as a mansion, maybe for its size, its detailing is not really unique. This is probably like a builder grade house back then, with a lot of the pieces like the lintel, the window trims, possibly purchased out of a catalog. And we just felt like there was an opportunity for adding a little bit more detail to the alley facade. Just that front cornice just seems so large and unfinished as you move to the side. And so that was our first response when seeing the property and seeing it. It just felt very unfinished for such a large and exposed facade. Next slide, please. There's a picture of it from the front. Next slide. You can see the Christ Church set back pretty far. We've seen that. Next slide, please. There's the rear of the property. Next slide. So here's that very large exposed side facade with the proposed cornice extension. Like how I was saying, we plan on keeping the main cornice with all this unique detailing intact, and that really has the most character to it, but then kind of simplifying it as we go down the side, and then simplifying it even further once we get to the addition. And really, I mean, the fact that it hides the parapet a little bit, it was an afterthought, or our initial response was just, it just seems such a large, unfinished facade, exposed facade. Next slide, please. So there's it without the cornice extension. Next slide, please. So here's like the typical alley typology. You know, the alley houses are they end right at the alley. This property is slightly unique because there's 3 feet of property between the facade and the alley. So where if these buildings were to have an elaborate cornice, they would overhang the alley. In this case, the overhanging cornice overhangs the property. Next slide, please. There is, these 2 buildings are in Capitol Hill, and both show the property on the right shows a similar condition where it's offset from the alley. So you have a little bit of green strip there, you have a sidewalk, and then that cornice is overhanging on that side. And then the property on the left as well has a cornice returning that's a higher building, maybe slightly similar to scale to 630 G Street. So we feel that returning the cornice adds to the overall character of the building and the surrounding neighborhood, and the neighbors all agree. When we originally presented it to the ANC Planning Committee, we had been working with Moira, who had mentioned a way to achieve more of a cornice return, and we showed that to the ANC and all to the neighbors. And then when we presented it to the full ANC committee, we had removed the cornice after being advised that it might not be acceptable. And then the response from the ANC was undoubtedly in favor of the cornice. They all were like, "Why are you taking the cornice off?" And we're like, "Well, because, you know, the feedback from HPRB was that we needed to remove that." And they're like, "Oh, why?" You know, and so we feel like we have strong support from the ANC and the neighbors on keeping the cornice and its effect to the character of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So I think most of the rest of the slides, next slide, please. Let's see if we can just go through them. We're showing the addition. You can see the orange line is the property line. The green rectangle is the existing house. You can see that space between the two. The blue is the addition, where it offset a little bit from the original property or original building line. Next slide, please. First floor plan. Next slide. The roof deck, you can see there's the penthouse stair. Again, just minimal to the size of the stair. The roof deck, you know, offset from all the walls. We worked with the neighbors to make sure that the view corridors to their properties were minimized. And that's why also the windows on the back and the non public side of the addition are very small, just to be concerned, you know, taking the neighbor's privacy into consideration. Next slide, please. Next slide. Showing some of the existing condition on the alley side. Next slide, please. Here's our proposed with the cornice. And we have, and then without the cornice. Next slide. the rear. We got the panelized garage. We have the smaller windows. Thank you. There's the non-alley, the non-public side. There's some of the views from the street. The neighbor's roof deck. Some shadow studies. Yep, that was it.
Thank you, George. I also just want to introduce myself and my wife, Veronique. We hired Anthony Wilder for the project. We've lived on the hill since 2009. We love the hill. We really believe in restoring the hill to its, as much former glory as we can. And this is an amazing property, and we're very excited to be a part of it. So we welcome your feedback.
All right. Any questions from board members? I had a question for Todd. You showed your preferred side elevation, which showed the parapet wall getting taller. I assume it's consistent with the height that's shown here, but just without the cornice. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And were you opposed to the addition of the cornice on the side elevation?
Not opposed to it. I mean, if the board decides that that's their preferred option, I think that's acceptable. Staff just believes that it might it'll change the appearance of the house more than the other options.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mike, do you have another question?
No. Go ahead.
Did you ever look at a version, I guess this is to Todd as well, or also to the architect, a version where the addition had a very, very, very modest capping, and you had the cornice continued of the historic piece along the side facade? It would be the version we see below here, but without a kind of decorative cornice on the addition.
We did look at a couple different versions of it, one including like a brick cornice, because there's a brick facade there. And it just seemed that it needed something up there. And so that's why we ended up with the smaller wood cornice.
And I guess to Todd, this is sort of interesting related to the first case we saw. It's unlikely that a building would be put in front of the church that would obscure the side facade view of this building, correct?
Yeah, it's been open for over 200 years.
And it's unlikely HPRB would approve the demolition of that church and someone would put a large multifamily housing project there, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's very unlikely.
So we're looking at the side facade of this pretty much in perpetuity, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thought so.
Yeah. I was having those same thoughts, Matt, that this is going to be very prominent, probably forever.
I guess to my way of thinking, I'm sort of jumping the gun on deliberation here, but
Mm-hmm.
it just seems like the side elevation is helped by having the cornice there.
I think so. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the cornice on the addition could be really simplified. It looks like a little mini me there, and I actually think it helps the registration of that as a kind of addition. If you could just do a simple either limestone coping or something there at the top that would just be very, very simple. Is that in the realm of possibility there, Mr. Architect?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we did look at doing some brick versions at the top there, and we just collectively as a group here, we thought that having that a little bit of a projection there to kind of complemented the main buildings.
But I think the more typical condition when you have an addition to a large body of a row house is that the addition piece is very straightforward and not ornamented in very much. And even though I think you've done a nice job making a nice facade here, it just seems like you could make a further distinction about the historic building and the addition if you just really simplified that cornice. And I prefer the one where the cornice goes around the side because I think it makes the facade look better, and I don't think that's against the sort of character of
Yeah.
the historic district, I wouldn't think.
One of the things that's hard to see from this view is that there's a lot of brick above the window. So that wall projects all the way up to the top of that, the wood cornice there. And so just having that much space above the window, it was,
Well, the cornice helps that, I think.
Yeah.
To my way of thinking.
Yep.
And it is kind of a formal facade in that the two sets of windows line up. You know, it's not one of these utilitarian sides where everything is just where it needs to be based on the interior function. It does seem to have some coherence in that regard.
Yeah, it's nice. Any other?
Those are my questions.
Okay. All right. We do have a couple of people who have registered to speak today. Both Donna Gambrill and Nancy Metzger. I believe I saw Donna Gambrill on.
Chair Heath, we are also reviewing the roof deck too, right?
We are, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you have questions about that before we hear testimony?
I just wonder about the feasibility of it, given the unique setback and the openness of the lot adjacent and the prominence of it, and the visibility of it. It is a very unique condition because of the openness in front of the church. Will always be there, I think, in perpetuity. And while I think they've done a good amount to minimize it, I wonder about, long beyond all of us, because we're looking in the term of hundreds of years related to the historic district. I just wonder about, the visibility of it and questions about the compatibility relative to that.
Is that a question for?
It's more of an observation than a question, but I wondered, I guess in a question, it would be to the architect and the applicant, what are the measures that you took to minimize the presence of the visibility of the housing for the stair, and what are the things that you could do to mitigate some of that even more than what's being shown in the drawings?
Yeah, the parapet wall extends up about 40 inches from the roof deck, and so that by itself creates a screen, and then we inset the roof deck another 42 inches from that with railings, so you're held off the actual parapet by 42 inches to really minimize the downward and outward views, but to just, you can still capture the outward and upward views. It's tough. Space is at a premium in the neighborhoods. There's not a lot of open space. So, a lot of people, there's a precedent for rooftop decks, and just as a way to capture more space, because, people still like to take advantages of the outdoors. So by offsetting the deck from the edge of the building to help minimize the views to the surrounding neighbors, and then the penthouse stair, which we did since the submitted version here, we brought that height down another 6 inches by bringing the whole roof down 6 inches. And also, some of the other things that the owners are trying to do here to try to be nice neighbors is they're doing a geothermal system. So there's no, like, if you go down Capitol Hill, you can see HVAC units sitting on top of people's roofs, but that's okay. But just having structures up there, it seems to be more of an issue. It seems to me like HVAC units are more of an eyesore than something like a penthouse stair. And actually, the picture in the staff report today, we just happened to notice when I was going through it this morning. If you look at page 2 of the staff report, which shows that Christ Church on the left, there's some children playing there in the foreground, and 630 G Street is on the right. If you zoom into that that upper, you guys can't see it, but this is the photo here. If you zoom into the upper corner where that cornice is, it looks like there's actually a an additional structure up on the roof that I'm not sure what that is, but it's, I'm just noticing it today that, let's see if I can point to it with my pen here.
The board can see it in our package.
Yeah, so, but I mean, we have tried to, in speaking with the neighbors, you know, we're trying to respect everybody's privacy, also giving everybody, you know, their light space, with the louts on, to the east. They have a roof deck. We minimize windows facing their roof deck, just to keep their privacy. Yeah, and you know, we had the flag test, so the like Todd was saying that the top of the penthouse stair was slightly visible, but we've worked to bring that down even further than we have submitted here.
Sorry, which address is it that has the roof deck? Because one of the things I did when walking around the site also was look around, but I've also, you know, had the advantage of Google. Granted, it's not, you know, up to the date because they don't scan the rooftops here, but I do see a lot of photovoltaics, but I do not see a lot of roof decks.
Yeah, and you won't see this roof deck either, not unless you're on the Google looking down from the top.
I think, well, okay.
But the elevation that you see here, like with the penthouse that exposed right here, that's only when you're seeing it. You're seeing it kind of from a bird's eye view. Really, how you see it is from perspective at the street level. And if you go back a couple slides to the renderings, that shows you, that's a three-dimensional model that's actually captured at eye view from the street in front of Christ Church. So you can see at the perspective view that gets hidden because the penthouse follows all the penthouse rules where you have the 45-degree. It's even within that envelope of the 45-degree from the roof line up. So and by keeping it, there you go. That shows, if you go back one slide, please, to where you were, where it shows the man up on the roof or forward.
Have you done actual physical sightline studies with any lumber or flags or anything?
Yep, there was a flag test done. Yep, and that's where we identified there was about 6 inches visible from way down the street. There's like one view because there are a lot of trees on the street, so it's very hard to see. But there's like one view where you could see about 6 inches of it, and so that's where we've worked over the last week to bring the roof down even further. This shows the deck in relation to the parapet wall, so you can see it's offset. The parapet walls are up. And to kind of bring the people in. So really there's no visibility from the perspective of the street. There's no visibility. If you go backwards one slide, please. There you go. There's, so the penthouse stair, it slopes, from the east elevation up to the top to help minimize that. And then it's offset, it's offset from the west elevation.
Sorry. If you haven't checked that with the current code, I know that's changed recently in terms of what you can slope and not slope over a stair that comes up to the rooftop, where they've squared off more of that construction as part of the code requirements. But I'm sure you've looked at that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So keeping the penthouse out of view from street level is a concern. Is the main concern that we feel like we've addressed through continuing to lower the penthouse down, and then as we were discussing, either with the extension of the parapet on the side, either brick or wood.
We don't. I don't think we have the photographs of your flag test in our packet of information, but has staff seen that?
Yeah, this is Todd. I have. I've seen their the flag tests, and I took some pictures myself. And what the architect said is correct. It's especially with the extended cornice, it's not visible.
Okay. Thanks.
And you're no longer proposing to have a pergola there, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's also a zoning issue too. And so that we took that out. You know, it's hard for agencies to give feedback without seeing stuff sometimes. So we submitted initially with everything, and then slowly have been modifying it since. So that was the original. That was the initial submission. We weren't sure who necessarily was going to have. It's not clear a pergola structure being a zoning thing, and so it was only after the fact that we submitted, and then we got feedback that we found that that was a zoning issue, and therefore took it out.
Okay, great. All right, any other questions before we hear testimony? All right, then I'll turn back to witness testimony, Donna Gambrell or Gambrell.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Donna Gambrell, and I reside at 532 F Street Terrace, Southeast in Washington, D.C. A native Washingtonian, I've resided at this address since August of 1997, and for almost 30 years, my home has been a family gathering place, a sanctuary, and for the past 10 years, an office where I've worked as a community and economic development consultant and CEO of a regional nonprofit organization. Since I've been on F Street Terrace, there's been little construction on this side of the alley, and certainly no issues that seem to result in any acrimony among neighbors, and I remain hopeful that the results will be similar regarding the Singh's renovation of their home at 630 G Street Southeast. I welcome them to the neighborhood and have done so in person. I also appreciate the fact that the Singhs reached out to neighbors to discuss their renovation plans. I joined them at a dinner they hosted in late September, and while most of the plans seemed fine, I did have a couple of questions and observations upon reflection afterwards, and communicated these via email to Mr. Singh. Two items in particular concerned me. One was the installation of geothermal wells in the parking lot behind 630 G Street, and the amount of construction and noise that would occur and might disrupt my workday. I participate in numerous Zoom meetings throughout the day, and my second floor office faces the back of 630 G Street. The second item was the addition of a garage, and more importantly, the placement of the garage doors, which would require the owners to enter and exit the garage in front of my house rather than the alley, which is how I have to enter and exit my own garage. I emailed Mr. Singh knowing that a hearing was being held on the plans for his house, and noted that I was generally supportive and that I believe we could address the issues related to the garage and the geothermal units. Upon seeing the most recent plans, though, and I may still not have seen the most recent plans until today, my questions about the placement of the garage remain, and my focus really isn't on whether there's sufficient space to drive into the garage. Instead, I was surprised to learn that the dimensions for the structures have increased, I believe, to 24, 25 feet. I was under the impression from our initial conversation that the garage would extend 15 feet into the parking lot. I'm concerned that my current limited front view will now be limited even more by a garage and the opening and closing of garage doors. And as I've thought about it more, I've had questions about just the structure itself, how close it actually comes to the front of my house. Clearly, I have some concerns about safety as well. I still work full time, and even though I work from home, I travel extensively for my job. I try to arrange my travel so that I arrive home in the daylight, but that's not always possible. Some cab drivers and Uber drivers have been reluctant to or have refused to drop me off in the alley at night. Others have, sped off, even though I've asked them if they could wait until I got safely to my door. So far, I've been fortunate. I've not been harmed in any way in the almost 30 years I've lived in the alley. But if an open parking lot can be discomforting, the thought of walking alongside or among structures at night to get to my front door is even more worrisome. And that's why I have questions about what that will actually look like, just based on some of the plans I had seen.
2038 with 3 units.
Okay. Thank you.
What is that?
Thank you, Ms. Gambrell. While we're sympathetic to your issues, because we are just the Historic Preservation Review Board and our issues are strictly related to compatibility relative to historic preservation in this historic district, the issues of noise and construction is not something that we can address. Although we hope that you and the owner would continue to have conversations about that, so that you're prepared and aware of what's going on. Just to clarify from the architect, that your garage is on the back side. That's an alley side, right?
Yes, that's correct. Let's see, there's one slide, I think further.
Yeah,
I think it
here.
might be the last slide. Yeah. So we have that. There is a access easement to another property to the east. And they have a garage there as well. So that would remain open as kind of like a driveway.
Mhm.
And then at one version, we did have the garage coming off the alley, but I think got feedback that it's preferable. I think it was either from you guys or from BZA to have the garage door not facing the alley. And for the security concerns, the Sings also have security concerns, so there was going to be additional exterior lighting and cameras to help augment the security concern. But for the if you go down 2 more slides, I believe. Keep going, please. No, that does show. Next slide. So you can see the garage door off to the left there. The property beyond 630 G Street has a garage there, so that kind of would need to stay open as a driveway to that property as well.
Mhm. Okay. Do other board members have questions, either for this witness or regarding any of the
Are you,
testimony?
you're showing a fence there right now? Oh, that's a little driveway?
They do have a fence. It's like a vehicle fence, which is beyond. So that's between the two properties. It's right in front of the garage door. The owner uses it. I guess there was some for 10 years. This building, I think, was vacant, and there was some just for their security. They had that fence installed so people wouldn't walk there.
Right, but you were just referring to an alley that would which would remain open. Where is that in this drawing?
Well, let's see. If we go to the yeah, this one right there. Thank you. So you see there's on the very right side, this is the proposed pervious driveway that we're doing. So on the top of this slide is the alley. Coming in, you can see the garage entrance to the Sings property, and then on the bottom of that, it goes. There's the fence location is probably hard to see but it's that hidden line that's going through the extension. There's like a little lower extension, yeah, right above your cursor. That's the I believe that's the property line, and there's an existing metal fence there, which is a vehicle fence, which would remain.
Okay. So there is an alley back in there.
Well, there's a driveway easement. Right now, it's gravel.
It's a driveway easement.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Gambrill. The next person we have is Nancy Metzger. Are you ready to give your testimony? Is she on?
She is on, but she seems to be muted.
Oh yeah, I see her
Okay.
now. Yes. Now unmuted. Nancy, if you're on, you can give your testimony, but we're not hearing you.
Are you asking me?
Yes. Are you wanting to speak?
Yes,
Yes.
I did.
Okay.
My name is Nancy Metzger, and I'm going to paraphrase what I wrote to you because it'll go over 3 minutes if I don't. I've lived on this alley at both ends for almost 50 years, so I know the alley very well. And even though this house has been altered many times during its lifetime, it has always, I think, maintained its essential integrity and its presence on the block. And after carefully considering the 3 options that were set forth in the staff report, my conclusion has been that option 1 is best. I have to say that I have not been able to see the presentations that were shown before during this presentation. So it's a little fuzzy to me. I've heard everything, but I haven't seen exactly some of the points, so I can address that. But it does, option 1 does not require alterations to the character defining features, as I think I understand it. And the only problem that the staff report associated with option 1 was that it was slightly taller than the rear wall of the historic house. I don't know what slightly taller translates into in terms of physicality. But if it really truly is slightly, that may be a better way of going, in that it saves the great cornice and the stepped parapet. Concerning the approval of the roof deck, and I know in the past, the board has allowed some, not allowed others. This one is highly visible, of course, and since it's open to the sky and the sun much of the time, it is certainly going to be a candidate for people wanting umbrellas and other things to shield them when they're up there. That's, in this location, seems very problematic when nothing would shelter a 9-foot or 8-foot umbrella, which is what people would want. One of the maxims of reviewing projects in a historic context in a historic district is that we should consider the context. As the staff reports, G Street is located on a block and a square that has many pre-Civil War houses. It's one of the blocks that are quite often on tours. And the relationship between the church and the house it's very important. But there's also the relationship of the F Street Terrace alley. And that alley extends not only as the through alley, but also as the east arm of the alley. And then so it is one of the treasures that people love to quote discover, and they love to see the Archibald Walk. But one of the great things about it is that it's open, in a sense that many alleys are not open. It's got not only the straight through that you can see, cars use it as a shortcut all the time. And there's, you come off of G Street and you go by this open lot with the churchyard on the other side. It's very open and welcoming. You go a little bit further and you come to the main east arm of this through F Street Terrace, and that's also part of F Street Terrace. It's a 30-foot wide alley, and it has the alley houses on it that are 20 feet tall. And the board has in the past taken care to preserve that low scale in the alley. And it's a character defining feature of the alley. You go a little bit further and there's Archibald Walk, which is even smaller. And then there's the open Christchurch parking lot. And even the E Street exit or entry is very open. You see what's coming ahead of you and there's a big space. So I think the proposed dark spaces that would come from building a 3-story tall addition, extending that 3 stories another 25 feet is part of the context and something that should be really considered. It's not something we can ignore, that this is a major change to the F Street Terrace context. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Metzger? Any questions? All right. And thank you for your testimony. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. Ordinarily, we would also have Beth Purcell. We have her testimony. Bruce, did she request to speak, or is she on?
Madam Chair, this is Ann Brockett. I do not have Ms. Purcell listed as a speaker for
Okay.
today, and she's not on.
Okay, perfect.
This is Bruce.
Mhm.
Marnique, Beth had a conflict for today and she will not be speaking, but she did submit written testimony, which is available to the board and the public.
Perfect. Yes, we have that. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss her.
That's correct. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Then that concludes our witness testimony. Are there any final questions from the board? If not now, then we'll ask the applicant to make any rebuttal or response based on the testimony you heard from the witnesses who presented today.
I guess for the last, as a response to the last witness, although this does add another mass to the open space, it's not uncharacteristic of of the neighborhood. Most of the alley houses or houses on the alley go right to the alley, so it creates more of a narrow feeling as you're going down the alley. This still does maintain a 3-foot yard on the side. And we did take into consideration the size of this. Zoning does allow for the addition to go further back in to the side, and we held off on that just to keep those spaces open and considerate for the neighbors.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess speaking, this is Amit saying. I mean, just from a personal perspective, if just the way we intend to use this house, we have elderly parents that may move in with us. Without that extra mass, honestly, I don't think we would move forward with the project, and we would probably sell it to a developer, which I think was who we competed with to get the house originally, and they would turn it into apartments. So if that's to me, if that's the preferred, I mean, without the mass, I don't think we could. It wouldn't the house wouldn't be the kind of project we would want to proceed with. So that's just I'm just speaking candidly because it's important to us. So, but I do appreciate the feedback regarding Donna, who we've had some wonderful interactions with. We are very sensitive towards the noise, and we respect that her and other neighbors do work from their locations. And so we haven't been able to schedule the geothermal drilling, obviously, because it's premature to do that. But we would definitely coordinate with them, and if we can provide any sort of alternate workspaces, whether it's like a WeWork or something, to help them during the days that there's drilling, we would offer that to them as well. So just out of personal, we would pay for that out of our personal pocket. So, but yeah, we definitely want to be good neighbors. And the security concern that Donna brought up is actually one that my wife and I very much share, because there was a lady right on that street that was hit with a brick unloading her groceries, and that alley is dark, and so I've even brought in a security expert to come in and talk about like what are additional lightings and cameras that could illuminate that alley so that it doesn't become or it actually improves the case for the current security posture for pedestrians and cars alike. So, but yeah, that's part of my response to some of the feedback. But I appreciate it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any final questions for the applicant from the board?
Yeah, I have one final question. Has the addition always been brick to match the existing building?
Our first take on it was to have a more contemporary look. I think we used stucco. We used a brick base and then a stucco on top of that. We wanted to kind of set it apart so you can have the historic, honor the historic. We pulled some lines in through the windows, and so we were bringing in a little bit of the language through the addition.
So the answer is yes, you have looked at other things, right?
Yeah, we looked at other things.
Okay. So for the, I guess, is it Todd of the staff? Who's the staff person on this one? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Todd. Have you looked? Have you made any comments to them on that about whether these additions in Capitol Hill are over the same material as the main building?
Yeah. Well, staff believes that it would look better with brick just because that's a strong characteristic of the historic district.
Right, but is it a characteristic of the historic district that the additions, even if they are brick, would be the same color?
Yeah, because it's such a I think it would make the rear addition more noticeable if it was a different color than the historic house.
Okay.
The existing brick is painted and part of the renovation would be repainting everything.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. All right, then is the board ready to deliberate? If so, then I'll ask board members to turn on your cameras. And would anyone like to start? Gretchen, you had a lot of comments about the roof deck. I think that's probably the part that to me is the most questionable of this proposal. Just given its potential for visibility. We discussed during the hearing, I do think that there's some merit to having the cornice continue along the side elevation, at least on the historic portion. I would agree with what Matt was proposing, to have a more simplified cornice at the addition. But I think, certainly having the added height as proposed by staff is nice. I think that the cornice, just given the visibility of this, is being so prominent. I would like to see on this alley side. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I share the concern about the roof deck. I mean, I think they've done an admirable job at concealing the structure. But as was pointed out by one of the testimonies, the activity there will be pretty visible. And part of it is because it's a side elevation and you'll see it from the park rather than if it was something that had, row houses right up against it. So I'm a little bit agnostic on that. I mean, I can see the point. I wonder a little bit about how noticeable it actually will be, but I do think two other things. I think the smaller cornice on the addition would be good. And to my way of thinking, if we do delegate this to staff, I would really look at making the addition somewhat distinctive from the main body. My understanding of row houses is that that's a fairly common thing. The piece that is sort of velcroed onto the back there oftentimes is either different in material or in color. It might help the original building stand out more, which might be a virtue. I don't think that would be a major change. I do think the cornice, the continuity of the original cornice around the side is appropriate here, given the space it's facing, and also the relative formality of the side elevation.
Any other thoughts?
Matt and Monique and Andrew, what do you think about even lowering just slightly the addition a little bit more than it is now to minimize it and make it seem more? So maybe
very,
the
very good
cornice
idea.
doesn't
Yes,
line up.
I think that's a very good suggestion.
Yeah, and just narrowing. I don't know how deep the roof structure needs to be for that. Maybe not, more than 18 inches at most, probably. But maybe
Can we
that
make a
can be
comment on that?
simplified.
Yeah, I think that would help.
Can we make a comment on that?
No, not during
No.
deliberation.
Okay.
You can work with staff once we've concluded.
Yes, Gretchen, the question for me is, I think that's a good suggestion. The question for me is, they have a break in the plane between the original
Yeah.
wall and the rear. There's a line there, so I'm assuming that's a plane break, right? It's not, is it coplanar with the, I have to look at the plan. Is it coplanar with is the addition coplanar with the historic building or not?
I see him shaking his head no, but if we can go back to the
Except like
plan.
a little bit, not much, but a little.
Yeah, and the width, I guess, is based on the garage, so it is offset somewhat. I guess it does make me even more question whether that material ought to be the same. I don't know how you all think about that, but the offset, I can see why they're doing it. I can also see why it's as big as it is. I think Gretchen's suggestion about lowering the height somewhat to make it more distinct from the original building is a good one. You know, I think typically a lot of these kinds of additions would have been made of siding in Capitol Hill, but there may be reasons to have it be brick.
And I could still see it being brick, given its prominence, but maybe a slightly different color. Certainly reducing the height will help some too.
Yes.
Well, I think if you're going to reduce the height, it just needs to be perceptibly reduced, not substantially reduced.
Agree. Yeah.
What do we
Does
feel
that-
about the roof deck?
Yes.
I mean, I think all the things we've discussed so far are pretty easy for them to manage. There, I think the roof deck is kind of a big one.
Mhm.
If we go to that plan of the roof deck for a second, roof level, would it be in the board's interest to pull it back away from the facade facing the church?
I mean, even more than the 42 inches or so.
Yeah, I'm thinking that if the occupiable part of it pulled back, would that minimize what's been brought up in terms of visibility?
Certainly, potentially. What do you think, Gretchen? Would you find that still problematic? You're muted if you're talking. I don't know if we lost her.
Yeah, no, sorry.
There you are.
Yeah, still an issue. And
So
it's
even
something
pulling
because
it back would still be an issue for you.
because you have such a long view there in front of the church, and it's flat there, right? It's not the church. It rises a little bit towards the church as you head up the street, but not substantially. But you have this long view that you get, which the applicant also talked about. You see the flags.
Mm-hmm.
Just be nice if the
what it-
stair could be over the addition maybe and not over the house, and maybe the deck is only over the addition and not the historic home.
Would you still have if it was over the addition, would you still have it located where they're showing it, or would you pull it back from the edge, or what?
I think it could be there if it was over the addition, because that'd be set back farther and it wouldn't be in that side yard, such a prominent side yard adjacent to the church.
Yeah, interesting.
That to me is the issue.
Yeah, that's interesting. Could we go to the floor below this? Yeah, that's not it.
We didn't submit that.
Oh, it's in the package though, right?
Correct.
I don't know. Yeah, it sounds to me like, I guess, Chair Heath, it sounds to me like these are things we ought to really ask for some careful revisions done there. Because I think Gretchen makes a good point. If you can have a deck over the addition, maybe not over the existing building. Maybe there are ways to make the addition a little bit more distinct, or study that anyhow. I mean, look, I'm happy to be proven wrong, and maybe having the brick color match might be the right move, and just have a planar distinction might be the way to go. But
Sure.
it sort of begs the question a little bit.
Yeah, so we would ask the applicant to then come back to us with some further study of reevaluating the extent of the roof deck, the location of the stair, with a preference from the board to see it just over the addition. And then
make,
no, you're nothing now.
We can't shortcut anything.
Or the deck over the addition, if the stair just slid back to that corner of the existing houses.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is certainly minimizing the appearance of that the stair, but also anything that might be on the roof deck once it's occupiable. So, so yeah, we could push the stair back to the edge of the historic building and the roof deck over the addition, and then further study of minimizing, or I'll say slightly reducing the height so it's perceptibly shorter. Speaking
And
of
then
the
study it.
addition, so it's perceptively shorter than the historic, and potentially studying a different color
Right.
material treatment.
Different finish. Yeah.
Mhm. So those two things. Is there anything else we would want to see? All right. Then
I do want to note that I think it's commendable that they are considering geothermal and permeable paving. I'd ask them also to add into that matrix of sustainability the embodied carbon of the fact that they're reusing a home of this age, right? That should be considered in their sustainable initiatives as well. If they're documenting what's part of their sustainability initiative, it's not only these modern interventions, but it's the continued use of this embodied carbon for the home that they're reusing as well. But I think that's interesting and very commendable.
agree, certainly. All right. So then we'll ask the applicant to come back to us with those two things that the board has requested, and we'll reevaluate and take it from there.
Does that happen at the next meeting?
Not necessarily. You have to work with staff to figure that out.
Just trying to understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the answer to that question is it can. It just depends on how quickly you can make the adjustments and work with staff on that.
All right. That is true. All right. Thank you. We're ready to hear our last application
Thank you.
for the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is an application that's coming back to us to present revisions after having heard this a few months back. 1254 to 1258 Talbot Street Southeast and 1309 to 1313 Morse Road Southeast. Amani, are you ready to?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, great, great. I was having some audio difficulties earlier. Just making sure you can. So, good morning.
Amani,
Thank-
Whoa, hold on, right?
Yep, not your turn yet.
Let me set the stage for him,
Yep.
and then I'll let you go ahead and go. Okay.
Yep.
Good afternoon or good morning, all.
Yes.
This is Anacostia Historic District, as Marnique spoke. It's a returning case that was heard in September for 1254 to 1250 Talbot Street Southeast and 1309 to 1313 Morris Road Southeast. The board reviewed plans for the construction of a six multi-unit townhome on a vacant lot in the Anacostia Historic District. The proposed development would be comprised of three-story multi-unit townhomes on Talbot Street and 3 4-story townhomes on Morris Road. During the HPRB meeting, the applicant and architect presented an updated site plan for the Talbot Street homes and discussed design aspects of the Morris Road townhomes. The board refrained from voting on the matter and suggested the applicant reconsider the facade design on Morris Road and reduce the height of the 4th floor on both projects. In the revised submission, the Morris Road now features a flat facade with the projecting bay removed, as well as slightly enlarging the 4th floor mansard style dormer. On Talbot, the site plan has been adjusted to align with the houses rather than stagger them, but the roof lines will step down towards the grade of the hill. A stone foundation has been added and porch details have been refined. The heights of the parapets, of the roof parapets and top floors have been reduced on both rows. And the revisions have improved the overall compatibility and design aesthetics, particularly by reducing the top floors. Removal of the bays from Morris Road has contributed to a more simplified style and is more in character with the historic district. To address the comments and concerns of the community on the compatibility of the proposal, HPO recommends that the applicant include more comprehensive specifications concerning the siding and roofing materials, and align them with the historic materials and architectural styles found in the historic district, as well as including grading details and landscaping plans for the exterior stairs and lead walks. HPO recommends the board support the revised concept and return with the additional information when the materials are ready. And then just a side note, I have received comments from Jamila Wright from the ANC. She was out of town and was not able to join. However, she wanted to note that the application and the applicant came to their November ANC meeting where they did not support the project, and will have an additional second public vote in December. She said there were concerns on the design, materials, and safety on the hill, as well as some parking concerns. And so she wanted me to note that, and we'll be submitting a letter in the future. And I will turn it over to Ronnie to go through the package.
Okay, again, good morning. Thank you, Maya. That was a comprehensive statement of where we are. I appreciate that. Well, I wanted to address the ANC hearing. We presented to the ANC a few weeks back, 10 days ago, whatever, and they reiterated their concerns about the safety of building anything here due to the large structure you see at the southern part, the lower part of the drawing there. That structure's in disarray. It has some foundation problems, and the people have been displaced, and so the neighbors kind of up in arms that the developers kind of declared bankruptcy, and they're worried that anything here could be a problem, regardless of. We submitted geotechnical reports, stormwater management reports, all the things required to get a permit and to proceed with the project, but they'd rather have nothing happen basically. That's their goal. It may be a single family home on both sides. But at this point, they were not historic preservation concerns. They actually said they like the facade. So I'm not sure. We have not gotten any comments about the design other than the fact that building there may exacerbate the stormwater management and the foundation problems. But again, we've submitted geotechnical reports and other things saying, the studies to make sure these buildings can work in this site. Much lighter structures, much shorter structures. That building's 60, 70 feet above the street. So, and it's on the top part of the hill. So I'm not sure what they did wrong, but we're not planning to repeat that. So I wanted to just show, and I don't want to take too much of your time. Those were the last one and on your docket, but we've the buildings were paralleling Talbot Street on the more historic side, and under the guidance with Imani and discussions with her, we pulled the facades back to be parallel as deep as we can to keep the 20-foot rear yard, still keep the sides of the houses so that the visibility of the town, the farmhouse type structure is better viewed as you come down Talbot Street. We're not blocking it as much. So we're as far back as we can go there. On the Morris Road, we really haven't changed the footprint of those. So I just wanted to share that with you as we go through this. If you can take the next slide. I wanted to note the fact that from Mount View Street, you can see number 4 there, how that treed sort of element there is Mount View is very much lower than our site. It goes up to the farmhouse type structure and into our buildings. So you really can't see what we're doing there much from that part of the street. From the Morris Road side is almost invisible. From Talbot, you can see it as you pass the farmhouse. Farmhouse has a lot of trees on it too, around its site too. So I want to talk about that because we will have a hatch on the roof to access the roof because we have green roofs. The owner would like to put a roof deck up there. I know I heard all discussions about roof decks, but the idea is much smaller roof deck. But we really have to figure out the exact count and size of the green roof. We may not be able to have a deck up there, but the point is we worked it out with staff and we asked your forbearance to let us decide if there could be a small deck on the roof with a railing around it. But we'll show you that in a minute. So next slide. So again, these haven't changed, but I wanted to note slide 2 at the bottom left-hand corner. That's the smaller house, and our site is right next to that to the right. You can see again the sort of neighborhood context of things on it. Very vernacular style houses, row houses, single family detached houses, houses with siding, brick, and a great deal prior to the historic district of intrusions of basically contemporary structures that have no relationship to the historic district. Next slide. So again, more shots, and again, one is a mount view place which you can look up toward our site. You really can't see our building from our site. You see the kind of tree elements. Number 3 there is the one in the middle there that's the apartment building complex that is in disarray, and it is, as you can see, 60-70 feet above the street, so it looms over everything. And our Morse Road project is right beside that, so we'll be way under that height. But the point is that's the structure next door to us. So next slide. So we chose a relatively conservative approach after walking the neighborhood many times, looking at the vernacular there, looking at the materials there. We chose an approach to use it, even on the Morse Road side, which isn't as historic because most of the existing buildings are gone, to do a 2-over-2 scheme for both Talbot and Morse Street and Talbot Road. So we used, we have headers above the windows, we have trim, we're using siding, we're using a small size siding similar to the rest of the neighborhood. So we're trying to match that. We took the bays out as indicated by Mania because we had the bays on Morris Road. And we have porches that we sort of, again, mimic the sort of personalized nature of the front yards where people can sit out front and look out of the yard. And so we try to keep the scale of that and the size of that porch with the detail on the posts, which we can obviously show to staff as we move along, railings, all those things. We're trying to put that neighborhood effect back in, even on the Morris Road side, which again has many fewer existing houses left. So next slide. So again, this is the effect here on the Morris Road side, very steep site from the front door down to street. And that's the rear. We have since the buildings back to each other, there has to be stormwater management elements built into the yards between the two houses. So it's going to be fairly elaborate control of stormwater management. You can see the green roofs there. What we've established on the roof is a hatch type structure, which is no more than 4 feet tall. It's less than 4 feet tall, so it doesn't create another zoning issue. It opens up to the side, opens up like a hatch, and you can walk out from an attic stair to the roof, so you can maintain the green roofs and do any mechanical equipment. But we also want to give the upper level owners a chance to potentially have a deck on that roof. So we want to keep that opportunity there, and I can show you one of it could be a small deck, but right now we need a small area that you can walk on. The rest, most of it will be green roofs. So next slide. And again, this is the Talbot Street side, much smaller scale. You see a step down. You can see the view from the street, basically seeing that small farmhouse in the background. And again, you see the sort of elaborate sort of stormwater management sort of lot areas that are between the two houses that we can control the stormwater. So next slide. So again, these are the arrays and the basic steps for Talbot, the more historic side. You see that deck. This is straight on. If you were 15 feet in the air, you could see this, but I'll show you that hatch will not be visible from straight on. As you go up the hill, you can look down on our roofs if you can see around the trees and see that hatch, but at this point, it's not very visible from most of the sides because of the trees and the slopes and things, but you could see it from on top of the hill as you go up Talbot and potentially up Morris. So next slide. So again, this is the Morris Road elevations. Again, you can see how steep it is from the front door down to street level from Morris, from the front doors. But that's the array that we would create, the 4-story array on Morris Street. So next slide. And again, sort of in context here, how they would fit in. And there's the building on the left. It doesn't do justice to the fact that if you go down to where the word Morrison is, and you look at the building next to us, that's 60, 70 feet from street if you're walking down there. There's a retaining wall, 6-7 foot retaining wall that runs into our edge of our property, and we would have stairs and basically turf going up to our front door. You see the walls there that can be stone-like to get to the front door. So we're trying to put it back in relatively in context, a little different from the other townhomes that have been installed in recent years. So next slide. So this is a new slide that we've added that shows the context of the two streets, Morris and Talbot. And you can see the hatches are pretty far back from the street. If you stand in the public way and you stood back, you wouldn't be able to see the hatches at all. And so if a deck is added, the hatch will be at 4 feet or less to not create a zoning issue. So it'd be 3'8" to meet the so you won't fall down into the hatch if the hatch is open. But the deck railing could be that type of element too, and it would be set back from any public way that you can see from the front. Obviously, the back is enclosed yard. There are some angles up Talbot and up Morris. You might be able to look down and see it, but generally you cannot see a deck, and we can make the case for that if a deck is allowed. Like I said, the green roof may be we may need every inch of the roof to be green roof. We may not be able to allow a deck up there, but if we can get a deck, we at least leave that to staff so we can show that it's not an obtrusive element. So this is basically showing the arrays between the two streets, Talbot and Morris. So next slide. These haven't really changed. If you go to next slide, these really haven't changed at all. We just kind of labeled them a little better, showing unit A and unit B. The only one different be the last slide, be the roof. This is we didn't show the green roof in great detail before, but this is what it probably will look like. And that area that shows that's the roof that's not green roof may actually have to get smaller due to the fact that the green roof has to be a certain size, or we may jog it to the back a little bit to create a little bit of area for a person to go on the roof instead of making it toward the front. But whatever it takes to make it as acceptable as possible, we can do that. And again, I don't know if the Morris Road side would need to have as much attention to it as the others, since the other buildings are not really historic, but that's your call. And then the next slide is we can go to Talbot Road roof, similar detail here of the roof being green. So again, we can slide that area back and forth to make it to be what we need it to be. So, and I think that's all we have, other than the fact that we have met with the ANC and the neighbors in different meetings, but their complaints are mostly about the fact that it's no parking, which parking is not, we'd never get a curb cut for these no matter what we did. And then the idea in a historic district being at a park somewhere in the front of these houses, you would not allow that. We tried to make that case in the meeting, but they made it so, how come you don't have parking, a garage or something? Morse Road, the slope is so high, I'm not sure how we'd ever get a car in there. So we tried to explain that. That didn't hold much weight with the folks. And then they wanted that they really didn't they didn't have the geotech information. We sent it before, and the project actually was approved prior to the historic district being extended by DC for stormwater management and for its structural work. So the original buildings, until we changed them to this new style. So we actually have an approved foundation and geotechnical layout for the building. We would reinstitute that, of course, for these buildings. And we try to explain the fact this is a much lighter structure than the structure next door, but that didn't hold much water with the neighbors. I understand their concern that Saeem would leave the buildings and leave people in a lurch with unstable structures, but that's not his history in this district. And he's tried to iterate that to them, but that again, there were no historic issues brought up in that meeting, and we tried to satisfy the historic issues based on the report and discussions with Amania, and we appreciate her help in doing that. So that's kind of where we are right now. I don't have anything else. I'll be here to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions from board members? No questions? The revisions definitely all seem to be responsive to the conversations we've had in previous hearings. So this may be pretty simple. We don't have anybody registered to speak on this application today. And Amania has given us an update from the ANC. So if the board doesn't have any questions, are we ready to deliberate? If so, you can signify by turning on your camera. All right. Is there anything that any board members would like to see further development on in this concept? Materials?
Not at a concept level, no.
Okay. All right, then I will make a motion that we support the concept with the revisions as presented and ask for a second.
Second.
All right. Then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone oppose? Great, the motion carries. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you very much for your consideration and your time. Have a great day.
All right, you too. All right, that's it for today. We will, we've one more month to close out the year, so we will be back in December. Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, this is a court reporter. I have a question for OP Historic Press.